The self-empowerment business is constantly expanding. You don't have to study anything. Simple associations are made and you can worship yourself in as many different ways as you wish. Anything else, of course, would be negative. Welcome to Windows on the World, and a great show for you tonight. We're going to continue our look at the cult of selfism, and we've done several shows on this. You can find them in the archive, and you'll find them on the live shows page at windowsontheworld.net. And I've also put some articles together where you can find all this information on the home page. There is an article called A Globalist Cult for Everyone, which includes all those shows and will actually include this show also. There is another article which is actually down as a post and it's just above it in the archive on the home page, and it's called Know the Enemy Within, and it goes into what we were talking about last week, which is the infiltration of everything, something we've talked about for years, of course, the communitarian system and the imposition of the Agenda 2030 goals from above, all framed, of course, as community. If that sounds a little complicated, that's as simple as I can make it. Do have a listen to the shows. Let's get on with the show. The rise of the selfists. So, is selfism the end of intelligence? Well, it's certainly contributing. The New Age mix-up of cartoon versions of, well, as we know, Hinduism for Westerners is indeed everywhere. Buddhism and Kabbalah have all come into the false light. In our recent shows on cults, the obsession with crystals, bangles and symbols is a cartoon, an unreality with no depth, but plenty of surface chatter from charlatans. The lost minds that follow are restless, of course, for the next fix of feel-good self-adoration, framed, of course, as mystery, as long as it requires little or no work. No input from the person who is being taken on this journey. And guess what? Guess what's just been announced to coincide with this show? This is from the UK Guardian. British University offers master's degree in magic and the occult. This is a cult exploring the impact, it says, of magic and witchcraft on society, and it comes amid, it says here, growing interest in folklore. Let's see what it says. If you've been getting into crystals, manifesting your dream board, or exploring feminist readings of witchcraft, are they serious? Well, I think they probably are. You can now take your hobby to the next level with the UK's first postgraduate degree in magic and the occult. No, we are not talking here about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn or any secret society which you may have to be initiated into. No, this is a roundup of every fad going under the name of esotericism and occultism. Yes, the mixing up of the occult is now just another wilderness of the mind project for the mindless. The UN goals actually should include inclusive fake esotericism for the lost souls of Gaia. So, the University of Exeter is seeking to harness growing interest, it says, in the subjects with a course that will explore the history and impact of witchcraft and magic around the world on society and science. Well, they have to include science, of course, to make it sound, well, what do you think? Scientific? That's why they do it. The multidisciplinary degree, it says here, which starts in September 24, will draw on history, literature, philosophy, archaeology, sociology, psychology, well, of course, what else? Drama and religion to show the role of magic on the West and the East. Professor Emily Seelove, who leads the course, said, "A recent surge in interest in magic and the occult inside and outside academia lies at the heart of the most urgent questions of our society." Really? I bet you can't guess what she's going to say. Not at all indoctrinated, not at all part of the globalist hive mind. This is what she says: decolonization, the exploration of alternative epistemologies, feminism and anti-racism are at the core of this programme. This is where logical fallacies collide with virtue signalling and hive mind political correctness to further diminish even the most obscure reasons for lumping together this surface waffle into academic non-achievement. She said, this reversed a tendency in recent decades to dismiss the study of magic and the occult, with the idea that it is no longer important to modern people, citing rituals such as wearing jewellery, considered to be lucky, or representing a point of contact with a distant person or thing, touching wood, or not shaving to avoid jinxing the team on match day. Seelove said a superficial glance at... Well, there's nothing more superficial than what she's saying here, is there? A superficial glance at our own beliefs and the beliefs of the people around us shows us that magic is a part of our everyday life. Well, not for the people who attend this course, I assure you. Responsible scholars would do well to take this seriously, she says, further destroying any academic credibility she may have once had. So mixing up folklore with ritual and magic into the wilderness of the mind project where nothing has any depth or meaning. It carries on. This is confirmed by the growth in the popularity of folklore, witchcraft, tarot and crystals. Lump it all together into a gift shop and put it in Glastonbury or some other place where these wilderness of the mind people in the wilderness of the mind project gather. She says it has been understood as a reaction to the decline of organised religion. The 2022 census found a rise in the number of people identifying as pagans and Wiccans in the... Well, you can be anything you want now, can't you? And it can change any day of the week. While shamanism was the fastest growing religion. I wonder if any of them actually know what it really entails and what it means. I doubt it. Have you met any of these idiots? I'm sure you have. Yeah, you have. Okay. Yeah. Well, Seelove said that the MA in Magic and Occult Science, here we go, adding the word science onto it does not make it scientific. Remember the terminology from the past, the mind sciences, science and spirituality. They put science with it to make it not sound like complete waffle. While the rest of the world is a place of magic and superstition, she says. Let's just take this line again. The assumption that the West is the place of rationalism and science, well, that's a big assumption to make, isn't it? While the rest of the world is a place of magic and superstition, including how it underpins Western culture and how its relationship with the natural world can bring new perspectives. Wait for it, you're going to love this. New perspectives to climate breakdown. They've got it all in there, haven't they? You couldn't make up how absolutely brainlessly retarded this actually is, adding on globalist warming for brownie points, along with the patronising and genuinely racist comment. The assumption that the West is the place of rationalism and science. Well, it was the place of the introduction of concepts which made people stupid and materialistic. That has to be said through the age of reason, of course, and people like Thomas Paine. But all these people are doing is carrying it on and sending it into a mind-numbing waste of time and space. This is exactly what was meant by the lostness of the mind. You don't need any outside propaganda, lies and the drugs that go with it when it's all rolled into one. Remember being traumatized into the wilderness of the mind project, the fourth world, through New Age, lies, propaganda and drugs. Well, here you have it all rolled into one, guaranteed to disempower anybody who takes on this garbage. She said there was a growing acknowledgement in academia that texts dealing with magic or occult subjects have been systematically neglected by scholarship in medieval and early modern history, literature and religion, as well as the history of science and philosophy. Actually, they have been studied and assessed by academics for eons. Who is this woman? Where did she come from? And why is she even allowed to speak? Because, of course, it's in The Guardian and it's part of a project which she isn't aware she's even part of. Useful idiot doesn't even come into it. This surface nonsense is a great reflection of the banal and the cult of self which underpins this garbage. That's what underpins it all. The me. Let's explore our own consciousness, but let's not do it in any way that's at all challenging or any way that involves any work and sacrifices the ego. Nowhere, though, is a better example of what we're saying than on a website called changeyourenergy.com. It's called Kabbalistic Yoga, the Inner Connection. Of course, these two subjects have no connection whatsoever, but in the New Age Hive Mind Wilderness Project, you can link anything together and make any connection you want. This article sums up the contradictory mishmash of unconnected mind warping. Yes, Kabbalistic Yoga. Have a look at our article, Clowns of Kabbalah, on the home page, and you'll find the whole history of this exaggerated nonsense which came from the heated brains of several people and then spread from the Languedoc into Spain and beyond, and even back to Israel through the Hasidim movement. We've covered the whole lot. But this article is a perfect summation of the lost mind. The growing awareness, it says, of yoga in our modern globalized culture is also making room for those yoga traditions that do not hail from India. Here we go, link it all together. One tradition gaining exposure is known as Ophanim, or Kabbalistic Yoga. Derived from the ancient teachings of the Kabbalah? No, it's not. A Jewish wisdom tradition for better living? No, it isn't. It has never been anything to do with wisdom or better living. It was from the fevered brains of people who were trying to view the divine household and become, in their own minds, elevated. Also using the tree of life, the 22 letters of the Hebrew or Aramaic alphabet as it is in reality, and of course gematria, the decoding of words using numbers. And this system, as we have said before, is not uniform and seems to depend on whoever is doing the interpretation. It says Kabbalistic Yoga includes breathing, meditation, and specific physical postures to internalize, wait for it, divine energy into the body. Oops, Shekinah. The primary tools for this process, it says, are the Hebrew letters. Now, what the hell has this got to do with Hatha Yoga? Absolutely nothing. But in the Wilderness of the Mind project, you can join anything to anything else. The Hebrew letters, Alpha, Bet. Long considered sacred by whom? Well, we know who considers them sacred, the people who speak the language. Each of the letters have a unique energy signature and can be related to important principles, even though, of course, they have nothing to do with them. These fallacies are made up and written down. Yoga and Kabbalah have absolutely nothing to do with each other. This is the New Age watering down of everything, which takes all inner truth away and leaves an empty shell, a receptacle which is filled by the false and the mindless, and of course the grifters who are there to take the money of the gullible Westerner. The tradition of reception or kibble is not based on any principles of yoga, but of course nothing matters anymore. The words have no meaning, they mean whatever you want them to mean. It says through sequences of postures, the practitioner brings the energy of the letters to life by meditating on the letters as they spell meaningful ideas and words, of course, in the imagination only of the recipient. Now, the New Age is way beyond logical fallacies now. It says each posture is held in connection with special breathing and sensing of the body in the meaning of the Sanskrit word yoga. Well, at least they're using the right alphabet. The practice unites. Here we go, is the word salad. Uniting time, space, and one's being to create a strong sense of balance and well-being. Word salad means nothing. The practice does not require previous knowledge of the Hebrew language. Of course not, because that would require work, wouldn't it? That would require some introspection, some reality, bringing some reality to what you're actually meant to be doing and seeing if it had any resemblance to this outward expression of physical yoga, which of course it doesn't. It says you don't need any previous knowledge of the Hebrew language, Kabbalistic texts, or any specific Jewish background, making it the ideal wilderness of the mind project for the gullible Westerner. Of course not. It has nothing whatsoever to do with what it's relating itself to. There is a specific posture, it says, for each day of the week and each month of the year. Each month of the Hebrew calendar refers to a sign of the zodiac, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and of course to a specific part of the body. Don't remember any of the conmen of Kabbalah even making such associations. I don't remember any of the conmen of Kabbalah, and I've looked at it quite a lot, making any associations such as has been made in this most ridiculous article, but one which shows the true cult of the New Age and the inner wisdom of selfism. It says, though many Kabbalistic yoga poses are very close, if not identical, to common India yoga poses, yes, I think they've actually nailed it there. So in other words, they're just using Indian yoga poses, Hatha yoga, and projecting a bit of Kabbalah, or the words that state it's Kabbalah, over it. It says they are based on the shapes and energies of Hebrew letters, yes, which is based on Aramaic. Yoga can guide practitioners in reaching into their deep reservoir and bring forth their best self. Have you heard it all now? Wait, there is more, a lot more. The self-empowerment business is constantly expanding along with this complete BS. You don't have to study anything. Simple associations are made and you can worship yourself in as many different ways as you wish. Anything else, of course, would be negative. So, the self and self-worship. Continuing the shows on cults centred on the self. That's what this is all about, the cult of self-worship. The useful idiots promoting the globalist cult of disempowerment are 2 a penny. The fake Western version of Eastern thought and philosophy, the use of psychology with everything, the self-defined interpretation of reality, the need to be defining personal victimhood. All of these are subjects which tie in to the cult of the self, the recent shows that we've done, and the article which ties it all together, which I mentioned at the beginning of the show. So, the competitive need to project outwards, the perceived harm done to oneself by the perceived action of others. This is a great section of the book that we've been covering, the religion of psychology, the cult of self-worship. It goes into how this whole self-help movement has actually enabled people to basically compete about how badly they are treated and have been treated in their lives. Quite an interesting thing to get into in this next section. The competitive need to project outwards, the perceived harm done to oneself by the perceived actions of others. Of course, this all adds up to this self-obsession and this need for some kind of system to work it all out, which is of course how this whole system of self-help exaggerated itself into these New Age movements. And it can be seen everywhere in the conversations of the mentally enfeebled, of course. It has created the false and the phony, this competitive need to project outwards perceived harm which is done to oneself by the perceived action of others. All of this is a huge part of the New Age deception. It has created basically another offshoot for the phrase virtue signalling, for those scared to state the obvious, whether based on fact or not. And this psychological self-mutilation, it used to be called political correctness, the castration of fact in favour of the acceptable lie. That's all it is. And sometimes, of course, it is realistic and necessary to blame abusers. But when the abuse is a badge of honour and about competing over actual reality, then exaggeration and lack of responsibility can all too often take over, and is also indeed encouraged in these groups. This is a very good point that the book was making. That's why I've jumped straight onto it here, because it was really the whole premise of where I was going with this show. And of course I always find other material as I'm working through things, which is why I think we had a bit of explosion there at the beginning, because I just couldn't believe what I was reading. But of course the victim, this era of being the perpetual victim, and the victim of course then becomes even more helpless as the system takes control. So all of this stuff, this whole cult of selfism and this cult of self-empowerment and self-analysis, which came through psychology, and all of the psychologists that actually put forward these theories are reviewed in this book, The Cult of Psychology, basically, the book we've been covering, and this religious fanaticism that people have about themselves. But the end result through intervention is diagnosing or creating illnesses to push drugs. And this, of course, is another part of what happens to people when they go on these self-discovery courses, when they find out that the whole thing's so shallow, they've just filled themselves again with emptiness, and then this can create the mental illness. Just like in Gods of the New Age, take a look at that documentary where people are jumping up and down for hours and just losing their minds and letting anything in, including, of course, demonic entities. So the end result, yes, is basically more business for psychiatry through psychology as religion. That was a point that was made very strongly in Psychology as Religion, The Cult of Self-Worship, the book which we referred to in that last show on this subject, namely The Cult of Self-Worship. That's the name of the show. It made the point that a recovery group or 12 steps program is similar to a lynch mob. That's where we're going with this, encouraging the participant to tell how bad their experiences are, to validate them to the group, and validating the group's purpose. The ever-expanding category of abuse now includes what would have been considered trivial or commonplace in more civilized times. This is a very important point. Civilized meaning more rounded in thinking, and of course experience, which is what all of this stuff is about removing, because experience becomes unnecessary. It's just all about what you are feeling and the way you react to things in the moment. So in other words, there's no knowledge at the back of anything. It is not all the fault of the expanding psychology, though. The notion of God as a projection of personal needs, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning. I mean, look at that cult, Kabbalistic yoga. I mean, this is quite astonishing stuff, really, isn't it? It's not all the fault, no, it's not all the fault of psychology, but the notion of God or illumination, whatever people want to actually call this, and in the New Age, of course, it's all the false light, is as a projection of what is actually just personal needs and desires, is central to New Age thinking. So it doesn't matter whether the person is trying to empower themselves or present themselves to a group as the hardest done by victim of that group, then it all achieves the same thing. There's no philosophy involved, as everything is defined in terms of the self, selfism. Philosophy is about a bigger picture, however, and that is something which is never mentioned. A way of learning from the outside and not centered on the ego and the self. And that is something that is completely missing, and that is what I really enjoy learning by philosophy, because it takes you outside yourself to universal truths. The universal truths are sidelined, of course, in favour of self-defined reality, internal projections which are not reality at all. Victimhood as attention-seeking self-gratification. Yes, very interesting that it talks about recovery groups competing with each other's stories, being one-sided and blaming others who are not there to present their side of the story. Well, for instance, the ancient Greek courts had prosecution and defence both acting out their side of the story in front of an audience, giving the assembled the chance to compare and contrast the two sides of the story. And now we find the ability to defame others as part of how one feels about something. That's what the media does all the time. It projects feelings. Everyone states they have rights, and there must always be opportunity for change. The self-empowerment movement of New Age self-development has given rise to overconfidence, over ability. And of course, those that are quiet and unassuming about their abilities are pretty much always better than those who express outward confidence. And those are, of course, often at best mediocre or much worse and much less than average. The world is now full of self-promoting mediocrities who have little or nothing to offer. Here we go. We're going to quote from The Religion of Psychology, The Cult of Self-Worship again. The claim that self-theory as a science is invalid by any useful meaning of the word science. It makes this point: humanist definitions no longer distinguish psychology and psychotherapy from religion, literature, politics, ideology and ethics, which really does reinforce the opening to this show. I'm going to have a very quick break actually, because I've been going for quite a long time, getting quite carried away there, and jumping onto a few different aspects of what this show is presenting. So I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Just a short break there. I'm trying to make these shows very punchy and concise, and I think we're actually achieving that. So humanism is another offshoot of the Age of Reason, and it's basically synonymous with the system of communism. That's of course why it was promoted. A lot of people I knew who were around from the 60s onwards are often define themselves as humanists. And it's a cult which removes higher thinking in favour of what is defined as reason. The Age of Reason then, of course, the so-called Age of Enlightenment, well, we've covered it. The fallacies of Thomas Paine's Age of Reason, we've done several shows on that. They're all linked actually to that article, that cult article on the front page, of which I mentioned at the beginning of the show, which I will mention again at the end of the show. It is the social Darwinism theory of the clueless or self-appointed elite. That's all this is. Now the materialist cult, of course, of self and psychology, tying it all together, the mentally enfeebled. And it was, of course, Carl Jung who filled up the emptiness of the self with a host of archetypes and characters. In fact, a whole community of characters who absorb patients for the rest of their lives. The internal psychological community replacing external social relationships. Again, selfism. And attaching these to experiences is, of course, what all of this is about. All negativity, of course, is generated outside the individual, and anything which is uncomfortable can be defined as negative. Many things which are uncomfortable are, of course, learning experiences. everything is a learning experience. Life is a lifelong learning experience. Basically, it's about picking your own values rather than adhering to basic moral duties. And of course, the mind wilderness awaits all those who do that, who basically go by their own values rather than adhering to basic morals. In the new age, all negativity can be seen as generated outside the individual. The expression of how one feels about it, well, it's all about that rather than looking objectively at what it actually is. Well, how many times have you stated a fact to some agent in authority and received a reply stating, "I'm sorry that you feel that we were wrong," when actually the facts are that they obviously were wrong? But this is a way of obfuscation, of gaslighting, which all those in authority now do, which is basically lying. So there we have the moral corruption, which is brought about by this adherence to one's own belief that what they believe is their reality. An obvious kind of example I can think of about this was a case I won against a council years ago, and they replied to me stating they were sorry that I felt I had in fact won the case, and then they stated their original false statement, which their argument had actually been ripped apart by a judge, as though the case itself did not and had never existed. I mean, I just couldn't believe it when it came back and said, "We're sorry that you feel basically that you won the case." Well, of course, when there is no truth, there are only different lies. Another term that comes up, of course, is creative potential, or in reality, expressing something which is assumed to be good, not meaning actually accomplishing anything, of course, of genuine significance or even creativity. I love this. It's absolutely fantastic when people talk about creative potential and nothing creative is actually forthcoming. The cult of mediocrity, once again, mediocrity is allowed, anything exceptional is shut down. That is what the Brave New World is all about. The I or me of the experience is accepted at face value. If you get everything you think you want, you will be happy. If not, blame anything else. If all interpretation relies on the interpreter having their own feelings, then there can never be any outside external reality. And this, of course, is the crux of the whole problem. The point is that most are now incapable of getting to the point. This is one of the main problems facing any insertion or assertion of truth or fact into the logical fallacies of those holding authority. This is the challenge of the times. This is where real argument has to be honed down and used as a weapon, because this is, of course, an attack. It has been done in ways where all arguments, of course, can be won. But, of course, if the arguments are not tolerated, then there is only one reality, the reality which is being created, the reality of the lies which are presented. The biggest lie, of course, of anthropogenic global warming does not rely on any facts, but it is accepted as though it is provable by science, which actually it never has been. Well, look at the online harms bill, the shutting down of everything outside the enforced corridor of belief. This has gone nearly all the way now, but how much further can it actually go? If there is no need for facts, then facts are what we are told they are, not what has to be proven. Well, before you know it, reality is, of course, a simulation, and there is no definition of reality, therefore no reality. In other words, that's your reality, not mine. No, it's a fact. There were witnesses. Everybody else saw it, you just chose not to. However, when that which is not true is called proven fact, the reliance is on those who can still think to do something about it. So, having said that, do check out the Lost Order of Knowledge on the home page at Windows on the World. And of course, those two articles. One is actually a post and it says, "Know the enemy within." The other is an article called "A Globalist Cult for Everyone," and that includes everything that we've covered in our shows about selfism and cults. And of course, "Know the Enemy Within" is based on the last show in the archive where we took a little dive into what is actually going on, what governance actually is. And I've linked so many articles and shows to both these articles. You'll find them a wealth of information and very simply and easily laid out. So thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll be doing some live streams over the next week. I want to keep putting out a lot of information. We had, of course, our last live stream taken down by YouTube within an hour. So I do put, of course, anything of importance on Odyssey and Spreaker. Do subscribe to us on both of those. We put all of our shows eventually onto the Spreaker channel. All our Sunday shows are on the Spreaker channel. All of our other material, including the Sunday shows, is on our Odyssey channel. The links are there on the homepage at Windows on the World. Do support this show if you can, and you can do that on the homepage at windowsontheworld.net. This is marginalized information, and I have put everything in the archive for you for absolutely free since we started. So if you can support us with anything, please do it. $5 a month or something like that would buy many chickpeas, and it would help with some of the bills of putting this out, because I have thought over the last couple of years whether it was actually worth carrying on. But of course, the listeners who actually appreciate the show and learn from it, some of whom I've actually met recently, are why I do it. So thanks to everybody who does support us, and see you soon on Windows on the World.